Good afternoon. My name is Sakina Moore, Program Director of the Monuments Toolkit at World Heritage USA. Today, I wanted to welcome you to the 2025 Monuments Toolkit webinar series and our September webinar, International Approaches to Monument Removal, Relocation, and Interpretation. Our summer webinar series offers real-time conversation about the monuments landscape. This conversation is meant to be a dynamic dialogue between all of us, practitioners in public history, historic preservationists, and anyone who cares and is interested about public memory and how it shows up in the built environment. World Heritage USA is a supporting organization of ICOMOS USA, or the International Council of Monuments and Sites, the United States National Committee. Since 1964, our mission is to promote the conservation of the world's cultural and natural heritage and stronger connections to the global heritage communities through advocacy, education, and the international exchange of people, expertise, and ideas. In 1972, ICOMOS was named by the UNESCO World Heritage Convention as one of the 3 formal advising bodies to the World Heritage Committee, along with the International Union for Conservation and Nature and the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property. As the professional and scientific advisor to the committee on all aspects of cultural heritage, ICOMOS is responsible for the evaluation of all nominations of cultural properties made to the World Heritage List with the criteria established by the World Heritage Committee. Our programming is made possible by generous funding from the Mellon Foundation and in their commitment to foster conversations and awareness of monuments, the monuments landscape, and their enduring legacies to our communities. As World Heritage USA, we also hold regular webinars on a variety of topics as it relates to cultural resources. And these cultural resources tell a profound story of humankind, whether it's natural phenomenon and landscapes such as Grand Canyon in the United States, Blue Ridge Mountains in Australia, and then also places that document the progression of humankind, such as the pyramids of Giza and the Aztec pyramids in Mexico, and also Timbuktu in Mali. We advocate for the sites that tell our human history. And we also advocate for the protection through knowledge of sharing regarding resilience and mitigations from climate change and other intersections such as public memory and also uncomfortable histories. Our webinars also offer emerging professionals places, a space to help strategize their career trajectories in the historic preservation space. World Heritage USA is situated, well, today we are coming to you from Washington, D.C., where World Heritage USA is headquartered. It sits on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Nacotchak, Anacostan, and Piscataway people. As an organization that centers Indigenous history and heritage, we believe that land acknowledgement is not land acknowledgement must go beyond words. It is not enough to simply recognize the land. We must recognize the leadership and ongoing contributions of Indigenous communities in preserving knowledge, shaping place, and guiding how we understand and care for our cultural landscape. So on that note, with today's presentation or discussion, as we talk about international approaches to monument removal, relocation, and interpretation, we always are looking at international approaches because we are a part of one community. And even though we have, even though rivers and political borders might separate us, we are bound and tied together by histories and also challenges and and that happen, that are similar, that we are also working through. So I wanted to introduce you to Alexander Almeida Marcusi from the University of Sao Paulo. Alexander Marcusi is a professor of African history at the University of Sao Paulo. His research interests relate to the history of African American religions and the intellectual history of Africa and the African diaspora. In 2017, he was awarded the Coimbra University Center of Social Studies Award for Young Social Researchers for his PhD dissertation, Captivity and Cure, Religious Experiences of Atlantic Slavery and the Calendas of Luisa Pinta, 17th to the 18th century. So I wanted to welcome Alexander Amida Marcusi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sakina, for this introduction. I would like to begin thanking ICOMOS and thanking you, the Monument Toolkit project, and you personally, Sakina, for the opportunity to take part in the webinar series of the project. I apologize for any difficulties I have with language and my expression in English because I haven't had the time to prepare a presentation, a written presentation. So I'm gonna improvise a few parts. So I apologize in advance for any problems regarding that matter. As Sekina said, I am a historian and my fields of expertise are mainly related to African diaspora and African history. But when Sekina invited me to take part in the webinar series, I was thinking about what I could contribute as a guest from Brazil and specifically a guest from the city of São Paulo. And I realized I could perhaps bring a few information and make some comments on monuments located in São Paulo, contested monuments located in São Paulo that are not directly related to the presence of Africans or African diaspora in Brazil, but rather to Native Americans. So this is to say that I am not an expert in the theme I am presenting today, but I thought it would be suitable for the webinar to present a point of view that is primarily based on the city of São Paulo and talking about how museums in São Paulo are dealing with matters regarding contested monuments, reinterpretation, relocations, and etc. So I think you can all see the beginning of my presentation, which I called Contested Monuments Depicting Colonial Pioneers in São Paulo. And I will be talking mainly about monuments that are related to the history of the so-called bandeirantes in Brazil. Bandeirantes is a word, of course, in Portuguese, and it refers to historical figures that played a central role in the memory of São Paulo state throughout the 20th century. So this bandeirantes, which I am roughly translating as flag bearers, and I will explain that soon. Those bandeirantes or flag bearers, they figure in a very important place in Brazilian memory and specifically in official memory in São Paulo. So we have a lot of monuments depicting them, and they are important characters in official history. Books for the official teaching of history in São Paulo and etc. So, who were these bandeirantes or flag bearers, as I am calling them? Those figures were expeditioners. Basically, they were Portuguese colonizers, Portuguese settlers, based mainly in São Paulo, in the São Paulo captaincy of Brazil in the 20th, no, sorry, in the 17th century mainly. Most of the activities of those bandeirantes happened in the 17th century, though they also continued during the 18th century. But most of the historical processes and facts that are represented in the memory of the bandeirantes happened during the 17th century in colonial São Paulo. So bandeirantes were Portuguese settlers, or most of them were not Portuguese born, they were native. And many of them, if not most, had mixed descendants, Native American and Portuguese, but they identified themselves as Portuguese, and they were colonial settlers based in São Paulo, and they took part in expeditions that were called bandeiras, since hence the name bandeirante. Bandeirante means in Portuguese someone who takes part in a bandeira, which were the names of those expeditions. Bandeira in Portuguese translates as a flag. So, and it was the name that was given to those expeditions. So, I'm calling in the lack of a proper translation, I am calling these bandeirantes flag bearers in this presentation. But the term bandeirante is prevalent in São Paulo, and everybody hears it all the time. A lot of public streets and public squares and roads and highways in the states of São Paulo are named after bandeirantes or flag bearers. So it's really a feature of the monumental and memory landscape of the São Paulo states in Brazil. And what were those expeditions or flag-bearing expeditions that those people took part in? They were expeditions organized by individuals. They were not official expeditions of the Portuguese crown. They were organized by individuals from the colonial village of São Paulo, or the colonial captaincy of São Paulo, and they had multiple purposes. They were organized for a variety of purposes that included commerce with Native American societies from inland, the search for natural resources, so searching for natural resources like gold or silver were one of the main concerns, or diamonds were one of the main concerns of those expeditions. And they also had a very important role in colonial economy as slave raiding expeditions. So those flag bearers, expeditioners, were one of the main sources of enslavement of Native American population in São Paulo during colonial times. I don't know. I don't know if you guys are familiar with aspects of the history of colonial Brazil, but Native American slavery featured a very important role in the history of colonial Brazil, especially during the 16th century, which was the first century of colonization of Brazil. But in regions like São Paulo and in southern parts of the country, Native American slavery continued for a longer time, and the enslavement of Native Americans proceeded throughout the 17th century and well into the 18th century. So while in other parts of Brazil, Native American slavery was progressively substituted for African slavery, in São Paulo, that was not so much the case. So Native American enslavement continued throughout the 17th century, and those bandeirantes or flag bearers, expeditioners, were one of the main sources of enslavement of Native Americans. And they also played an important role in repressing slave revolts in colonial Brazil and Native American revolts. So those flag bearer expeditions were an important part of the colonial apparatus of domination and exploration of native populations. For instance, the biggest maroon community, African maroon community that existed in colonial Brazil, which was Palmares, located in northeastern Brazil. The final attack against Palmares, which was the attack that was finally responsible for destroying the main city of Palmares, the capital, the final attack was carried out by one of those flag bearers from São Paulo. He traveled inland all the way from São Paulo to northeastern Brazil in order to lead the military expedition against Palmares. So those expeditions, or what we call bandeiras, or those flag-bearing expeditions, as I am calling them, they had a very important role in the repression of Native Americans and the enslavement and control of Native Americans and Africans in Brazil. And they are usually, this is not the way, of course, they were usually depicted in nationalist discourses. They are treated mainly like heroes of the colonization of Brazil and the founding of the nation. They were represented as responsible for the unity of the territory and the construction of the nation of Brazil. So their role, their violent roles, and their role as enslavers has not gained so much popular attention in official discourses, and just recently this has been publicly acknowledged. But the way those flag bearers are traditionally represented in official memory is as some sorts of pioneers. So travelers or expeditionaries who were responsible for expanding territorial boundaries of Brazil. Because in the beginning of colonization, in the beginning of the 16th century, the diplomatic treaties between Spain and Portugal that established the boundaries between areas of Portuguese colonization and areas of Spanish colonization, they defined a narrow strip of land for Portuguese colonization, and those expeditions to the inland parts of Brazil made by those flag bearers, they they usually went far beyond those supposed boundaries that were established by diplomatic treaties. So, in public memory, the enlargement of Brazilian territorial boundaries is generally believed to be the responsibility of those expeditions, because in fact, many villages that would be the starting points of inland provinces of Brazil, such as Minas Gerais, Goiás, Paraná, Mato Grosso, and so on. Many of those villages were founded from settlements that were created by those expeditions. So in official memory, those flag bearers are generally remembered as explorers, as pioneers, and as the people responsible for the enlargement of Brazilian territory. They are conceived of and represented as having opened the ways that led to the incorporation of other inland territories that were regarded or seen as empty lands to be taken by Portuguese settlers and colonizers, but were obviously they were actually territories that were heavily occupied by Native American populations. So, in fact, those expeditions were also responsible for a great deal of land that was taken from Native American populations. So I'm gonna be talking a little bit about the monuments that concern this kind of historical memory in Brazil and in São Paulo particularly. And I would like to begin with a museum in São Paulo, which is called the São Paulo State Museum, or Museu Paulista in Portuguese. It is popularly known as the Ipiranga Museum. Ipiranga is the name in Native American language, Tupi, in Tupi, for the place where the independence of Brazil, the Declaration of Independence of Brazil supposedly happened. Of course, this story has a heavy mythical aspect to it, but this place here in São Paulo is considered and regarded to be the place where the first Brazilian emperor, Dom Pedro I, Dom Peter the First, proclaimed Brazilian independence. So it is located here in the city of São Paulo, and this museum was built in the exact spot where this proclamation is supposed to have happened, according to official chronicles and sources. So the museum nowadays it belongs to the University of São Paulo. So it is curated and organized by researchers and professors. But when it was founded in the end of the 19th century, the university didn't exist at that time. And the museum was founded so in 1893, and it was founded as part of the commemorations for the end of the Empire of Brazil, the end of monarchy, and the transition to Republican regime in Brazil. And it was built and designed primarily when it was opened in 1893. It was designed primarily as a museum of natural history. So it had collections of biological specimens and plants and so on. And this was the characteristic of this museum until the beginning of the 20th century, when it was taken over by a curator who was a historian called Afonso Descanhol Tonei. He was a Brazilian historian from French origins. And Tonei introduced in the museum a new curatorial, a new museological project, and a new exposition or exhibition that was related to the history of São Paulo and the history of Brazil. So, beginning at 1917, the São Paulo State Museum started to become a history museum and not a museum of natural history anymore. And as part of those new museological projects, the curator commissioned a lot of new monuments that would be incorporated to the collections of the museum. And those monuments were primarily monuments celebrating those flag-bearing pioneer expeditions, the bandeiras. A few different monuments that I would like to show to you that were located mainly in the entrance hall of the museum, the noble hall of the museum, which has the monumental staircase that you can see here on the left of this image. This monumental staircase was decorated by statues of those flag bearers, which you can see in the image. So we have 6 statues of the flag bearers here in this photograph. We can only see 4, 2 on each side, but there are 2 more here and here on the sides, and they they were commissioned by the curator, Afonso Tonei, to depict 6 flag bearers who were held responsible for the founding of 6 different inland provinces of Brazil. So this was a narrative about how São Paulo led the process of territorial expansion of Brazilian boundaries. In the center the main wall of the monumental staircase, there is a bigger statue of the Empire of Brazil's first emperor, Dom Pedro I, or Peter the First. So this is commemorative of the independence. This, remember, this is the exact site where the Declaration of Independence is supposed to have happened. So this is a monument celebrating the independence of Brazil and the birth of the Brazilian nation. So of course, the first emperor is celebrated here, and he is showcased in a more important position in the monumental staircase, but he is surrounded by the figures of those flag bearers who were so narratively held to be responsible for the expansion of the boundaries and, after all, the formation of the country in the end. This is how the narrative goes. And the staircase is also decorated by a lot of files, as you can see here in the photograph. Here you can see 12 of them, but there are actually 16. So there are four more, two more here and two more here at the top of the staircases. Vials with waters from different rivers in São Paulo. In the photograph to the right, you can see one of those vials. They are all decorated with animal and botanical themes depicting Brazilian species, and the vials contain the waters taken from the rivers, which were the main ways of expansion, or the main ways of transportation for those flag bearer expeditions. So they are really items that are commemorating the paths that led to the expansion of the frontiers, the expansion of the territorial boundaries, and the growth of Brazil as a country, as a new independent country. So this is the narrative that the monumental staircase was creating with those monuments that were commissioned by the new curator. And the thing is, the problem is, well, just before we go to what happened next in the museum, maybe it is important to understand the ideological role that this kind of discourse had in São Paulo at the beginning of the 20th century, when the museum was turned into a historical museum, because this was the time when the narrative of those and the memory of those flag bearers, the bandeirantes, was considered and was promoted by official discourses and by the state government of São Paulo as a true ideology. This became an ideology narrating and representing the importance of São Paulo in the construction of the country. Because São Paulo, during the whole 19th century, São Paulo had a secondary political role in Brazil, because the capital was Rio de Janeiro, and until the mid 19th century, the economic powers were concentrated in Rio de Janeiro and not in São Paulo. São Paulo was a small village until the beginning of the 19th century, or half of the 19th century, and the economical growth of the state happened in the final half of the 19th century. So when Brazil uh, transitioned politically from the empire to republican government, that happened in 1889, São Paulo was some sort of economic and political rising star in Brazil. But the capital was still located in Rio de Janeiro, and the political elites were still divided. And Rio de Janeiro had much more cultural and importance and prestige in Brazilian culture. So this flag bearer ideology that became to be promoted by São Paulo state intellectuals and São Paulo state government was an attempt to shift the cultural balance and to bring some importance in the Brazilian history to the people of São Paulo, the people of São Paulo states. São Paulo was had a marginal importance in Brazilian history until the beginning of the 20th century. So this myth of the flag bearers was a way of kind of inventing a prestigious past or an important, a glorious past for the state of São Paulo. And this was a time when coffee production and industrialization was basically concentrated in São Paulo. So São Paulo had a very big economic role in Brazilian scenario at the beginning of the 20th century. And São Paulo was generally represented as, this was the discourse of the time, the narrative, São Paulo was represented as some sort of locomotive of the Brazilian country, like the state was pulling the whole country to the direction of the future and the progress and so on. So the narratives on those expeditions, the flag bearers expeditions, were an attempt to bring some historical prestige and importance to the memory of São Paulo. So this is why the curator Afonso Toné he commissioned those monuments, and he created this kind of narrative in the São Paulo State Museum. But the problem is, so this is what happened in the following decades, and this presented a big challenge to the managing of historical memory in São Paulo. The problem is that this building, the São Paulo State Museum, was registered as cultural heritage by a federal institute in Brazil. It was registered and protected by law in 1938, and as a registered building, its architectural features were protected and could not be changed in renovations of the building. And this included the staircase, the monumental staircase. So the decoration of the monumental hall, the entrance hall of the museum, was also protected by law and could not be changed. So this, when new curators came and wanted to make to make a departure from this kind of narrative, glorious narrative of the past of São Paulo, they were not allowed by law to change anything on the decoration of the main hall. And this presented a significant challenge for the curators of the museum, especially when the museum was incorporated into the university and curators tried to create new narratives and new forms of representation of the past in the museum. That happened especially during the 1980s, when a big renovation of the exhibition was attempted, but then there was this fundamental problem with the law, the fact that the monuments in the entrance hall of the museum could not be changed. And they depicted and portrayed a glorious narrative of the expansion of the flag bearers from São Paulo. So in 1990, a new master plan for the museum was elaborated by a historian from the University of São Paulo called Ulpiano Menezes. And the way he found to introduce a significant change in the narrative and the representation of the past in the museum and in the collections was to make a reinterpretation of this collection, and especially of the monumental staircase and the entrance hall with the big statues of the flag bearers. So the option that was taken, I mean, all of the other rooms of the museum could be changed and collections could be reallocated and transformed, and new collections were acquired by the museum, new items. So all of the other rooms of exhibition could be easily transformed, but the main entrance could not. So the option that was taken by the new master plan by Upiano Menezes, who was then at the time the curator of the museum, the main curator, was to make a reinterpretation of the collection. So the other rooms were very critical of the role of the flag bearers. So they showed this other aspects, violent aspects, enslaving aspects of the action and the history of the flag bearing expeditions, but not much could be done on the main entrance hall. What was done was to compare or to maybe mitigate the effect of this glorious narrative using the counterpoint of the other rooms and texts, explanatory texts in the entrance, and also the role of the educators from the museum. So educators would typically begin a visit at the entrance hall, questioning critically why those monuments were there and what narrative, what historical narrative they were trying to convey, which is a very interesting approach to it, after all, in the end, because it was a way of showing the public that the museum was creating a particular narrative of the past. So it was a way also of enhancing the public's, the visitors' critical perception of the collections. The museum, the São Paulo State Museum, underwent a major building renovation in recent years, from 2013, I guess, 2013 or 2015, I don't remember exactly, until 2022, 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, it reopened after a big building renovation, and some more critical reinterpretation of those monuments were made, but the room was not the monuments were not removed. They were recontextualized and reinterpreted using now. They are using totems, and totems containing visual and audio material. So alternative ways of telling the history of São Paulo by voices of Native Americans, Black population, Black intellectuals, Native American intellectuals, and etc. So there now we can see the monuments that were installed there at the beginning of the 20th century, and we have the counterpoint of these other histories and other voices that tell different stories about those flag bearers. This is how this was reinterpreted today. And I would also like to bring to this webinar, to this presentation, the case of two other monuments in São Paulo that depict the history of those expeditions, the flag-bearing pioneer expeditions. This is the most well-known of those monuments in São Paulo, probably, which is the monument. It is called Monumento às Bandeiras, which translates as Monument to the Flag-Bearing Expeditions. It was created by a Brazilian modernist sculptor called Victor Brecheret. He was actually Italian-Brazilian. He was born in Italy, and he migrated to Brazil with his family when he was still a kid. So he grew up in Brazil, and later on he studied in art and sculpture in France also. But he was one of the key figures of Brazilian modernist sculpture. And he was the one responsible for designing that monument. The monument was designed in the 1940s. The first version of the monument was initially presented by Victor Brachuret in 1920 for the commemoration of the 100 years of Brazilian independence. The independence of Brazil happened in 1822. So the first version of it was presented in 1920, but it was rejected by the São Paulo state government because it was considered way too modernist. They wanted a more traditional approach to it. So a new project was presented again in 1940, and it was accepted to be part of the new monument that was being built in São Paulo's biggest city park, which is Ibirapuera Park, and it was opened and construction of the monument was ended in 1953. So this is a picture of that monument. Here we can see a few things about how those expeditions were represented. We see on the right the figure of the leader of the expedition on a horse. There are actually two horses with two leaders of the expedition. They are Portuguese. In the expedition, we can see a lot of people, as you were seeing in the photograph, and we can see by their facial features. Although the figures are highly stylized because of the modernist style of the sculpture, we can see the racial features of the figures in the faces. So we can distinguish clearly between Portuguese figures, which were bearded, Native American figures, and African or figures people of African descent in the sculpture. So the sculpture constructed this narrative of the expeditions as expeditions that were led and organized by the Portuguese. Those are the leaders of the expedition on horses, and they were composed of people of different origins. Here in the main part of the monuments, this group of people are of mixed origins. We have a few Portuguese people, a few people of African descent, and Native Americans. So this was a representation of those expeditions as mixed race expeditions, but led by the Portuguese explorers or these flag bearers. And the monument depicts the act of carrying a canoe, because those expeditions moved around using the rivers of São Paulo as paths of traveling, but they had to carry the canoes on a few lands, a few land trails. So this is the scene being represented here. And this monument was built so in 1953, and it had a strong resonance to another kind of ideology, nationalist ideology in Brazil during the whole 20th century, which was the racial miscegenation ideology, or the belief and the narrative that the birth of the Brazilian nation was formed from the confluence of the three so-called founding races: the Portuguese whites, the African blacks, and the Native Americans. Sometimes this was represented in Brazilian nationalist discourses as a sort of mixed race foundation for Brazilian society, and Brazilian society as a whole was represented as a mixed race nation, or a nation that was came from miscegenation processes. And sometimes this was depicted as some sort of the expression that was used in Brazilian culture was racial democracy. So the idea that because there was the confluence of and the miscegenation of the three races, the social relations between whites, blacks, and Native Americans in Brazil would be supposedly softer or more equal than in other parts of the world, like the south of the United States or South Africa, where racial legislations and racial discrimination was officialized in law. So the ideology goes on saying that because of this mixed race in Brazil, mixed race process, there is not so much racial tension in Brazilian society, which is, of course, a myth again. But so this monument carried all those meanings together. It carried the meaning of this glorious past of São Paulo state, and it carried the myth of this formation of Brazilian society with the coming together of the three founding races. So this monument was heavily contested. Uh, uh, Beginning at the second half of the 20th century. It began to be contested during Brazilian military dictatorship because it portrayed an image of progress and an image of a heroic nation of Brazil, and this was in contrast to the perception of a dictatorial and very violent government during the military regime era. And in the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, people began questioning this monument because of the way it's depicted or it's featured as leaders or as heroes, the figures of those flag bearers who were responsible for enslaving Native American populations. So this was highly contested because of that because of a criticism to this ideology of the flag bearer expeditions. Uh, some of those interpretations are potentially debatable because it is also possible to read in the monument the a possible interpretation of the monument is that while the expeditions were led by the Portuguese whites, the people who made the heavy work of carrying the canoe were not Portuguese. They were Native Americans and they were primarily Black people. So it is also possible to see here a sort of perception of the exploration, racial exploration of work in Brazil. But the monument anyway began to be heavily contested because of this whole ideology of the flag bearer expeditions. And also, the monument was not isolated in the context, in the urbanistic context, because it was situated near this big park in São Paulo, Ibirapuera, and it was part of a composition of monuments, a composition of monuments that I am calling here the Ibirapuera Monumental Axis. So it was part of an axis with three big monuments that depicted parts of the history of Brazil and particularly the history of São Paulo and the role of São Paulo in Brazilian history. The most recent one is the one on the left in this image, which is a monument to Pedro Álvares Cabral. It was built in 1988 for the commemoration, the beginning of the commemorations of the 5 centuries of the so-called discovery of Brazil. Um, and it represents a historical figure, Pedro Álvares Cabral, who was a Portuguese navigator, and he was reputed to have been the first one to reach Brazil in the beginning of the 16th century. So he's widely considered in official memory as the responsible for the so-called discovery of Brazil and the birth of the country. So the fact that a monument is commemorating his figure here near the monument to the flag-bearing expeditions is very revealing. Is revealing of the fact that those monuments together are telling a history of the country, a history of the country in which São Paulo history has a big role and is regarded as an important part of that history. And in the other photograph on the right, we see the third of those monuments, which was created right at the same time of the monument to the the flag bearing expeditions. This one you see in this photo. So this third monument is an obelisk, as you can see, and is called the Monument to the Heroes of the 1932 Constitutionalist Revolution. And it makes reference to an episode of the history of São Paulo state in Brazil in 1932, where when there were military fights between the military from São Paulo and the federal troops in Rio de Janeiro. By that time, the capital of Brazil was still Rio de Janeiro. So this revolt of the military from São Paulo was met with the troops coming from Rio de Janeiro, and there were fights in the north of the state, the north and the east of the state of São Paulo. It was a small episode of some sort of civil war in Brazil. And it is generally depicted in São Paulo official memory and narratives as an attempt, or it is called a revolution, because it is represented as an attempt of the São Paulo military to protect Brazilian republic and democracy after the coup d'etat that happened in 1930 in Brazil, because in 1930 there was a coup d'etat, and this was the end of the first Republican period in Brazilian history and the beginning of the so-called new state. And in this coup d'etat, São Paulo political forces were dominant in the first Republican period, and they lost a little bit of their power and political leverage in this coup d'état. So this was an attempt to regain some measure of the power that was lost by São Paulo political elite of that time, but it is in official memory commemorated as an attempt to protect the constitution from the changes that were being introduced by the new regime and the 1930 coup d'état. I'm not going to go into much detail about this because this is not the center of our attention, but just for you to understand that these three monuments together, they tell a story. They tell a story of the country, and they tell a story of the country in which São Paulo state is represented as being a leading force in the expansion of the territory, a leading force in the formation of Brazilian society as a result of processes of racial miscegenation, and a leading force in the defense of Brazilian Republic. So this is really a commemoration of the supposed importance of São Paulo elites. And in 2013, so 12 years ago now, this monument to the flag-bearing expeditions suffered an intervention, a popular intervention from a social movement. There were big demonstrations that were organized by Native American organizations in São Paulo, and they made this intervention, which you can see here on the photograph on the left. So red paint was thrown in the characters of the monument, which the effect is that it seems as the statues were covered in blood. So to remember the violent roles and the violence that was committed by those expeditions against Native American populations and against African populations in Brazil. And some words were also written in the canoe. Here you can see the words Bandeirantes Assassinos, which translates as assassin bandeirantes or assassin flag bearers. And this intervention was done as part of demonstrations that happened against a new law that was being discussed in Brazilian Congress, which is the Bill 215, and it is a law that was related to the demarcation of Native American reservations in Brazil, and it made the demarcation, the protection of Native American reservations much more difficult. It made the legal status of those reservations much more fragile. So one of the other words that were written in the monument was no to the Bill 215. Eventually, this bill was actually incorporated after a long discussion. It was incorporated in Brazilian law. We can go back to that point if there is any interest. And the last monument I would like to bring to your attention, and I'm going to finish my presentation here, is another monument in the southern parts of São Paulo, which is in commemoration of one of those flag bearers. And this is the monument to a flag bearer that was called Borba Gato. Uh, it is very, very big. It is a colossal statue. You can't really see how tall it is by this photograph, or maybe you can if you just look at the sides of this person on a bike here and the traffic lights here. Because of the distance, you can't tell for sure, but it is a very tall statue, and it is reputed. It is very famous in São Paulo, this statue, and it is widely considered as a very how can I say that? A very ugly statue because of the statics, this kind of naive statics of the statue. It was created in 1963, and it commemorated the figure of one of those flag bearers who was native from that neighborhood of São Paulo, that region of São Paulo in South São Paulo called Santo Amaro. And in 2021, during the COVID pandemics, it also suffered an intervention from a movement, a social movement of deliverers, workers with delivery in motorcycles. They organized a demonstration and they surrounded the monument with tires, car tires. They put fire on the car tires, and you can see the photograph of this the blazing of the statue here on the right. What is particularly interesting about this intervention to the monument to Borba Gato is how the image of the burning statue was widely shared in 2021, and the image of the burning statue was became actually more popular than the image of the statue itself. So more people today in São Paulo remember Borba Gato with the fire than they do without the fire. And especially because this is a part of São Paulo that is relatively far from downtown. So not everybody goes to that neighborhood and not everybody sees in person that monument. So the fact that those photographs and videos went viral in 2021 contributed to the fact that the mental picture we have of this monument in São Paulo is much more related to the burning of the monuments and not the original image of the monuments itself. And what's interesting for me about this image is how it conveys a representation and an image of the flag bearer, which is much more terrifying than the original monument. The original monument with this sort of naive aesthetics seems almost as if he was a harmless figure. He is, of course, holding a rifle in his left hand. but he doesn't have any kind of menacing attitude. And the photograph of the burning statue with the smoke and the fire, it really conveys a sense of terror and a sense of threat that, in my opinion, is much more suitable to the historical role that those flag bearers used to to actually represent in the history of São Paulo. And well, this is what I would I brought to share with you guys today, and I hope it was an interesting presentation. I took a lot longer than I thought I would take for this presentation, but as I am the only one presenting the webinar today, I assume this is not such a big problem, and I apologize if I caused any inconvenience. So thank you again, Sakina and Icamos, for the opportunity of being here, and I am open to conversation and questions and the debates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Makuzi, for your great presentation and your insight into monuments in Brazil and specifically in Sao Paulo. I wanted to, I have some questions and I think that'd be great to have like a great conversation, but this is also a collective conversation with our audience as well. So if you have any comments or any questions, please feel free at this point to enter your questions in the chat. So there's a little box below that says chat, and we'll be sure to answer any questions that you might have. And I know that we'll do our best to get to all of your questions. Dr. Mercuzzi, I couldn't help but to, while listening and viewing your presentation, I couldn't help to notice all the similarities that we have with regards to monuments and how we approach them, and even like the mythology of people who we hold as heroes, and what is it and what it means. And there's so many different intersections that I think that tie us together, but then also some various aspects that I think that'd be really interesting to explore during our conversation. Specifically with your experience with we were talking about the Sao Paulo State Museum and the exhibit. And the exhibit itself is a landmark, so it can't be altered in any way. When you mentioned that there's so many things that we have here where things might have landmark status, or there might be some kind of easement, or not like an easement, but some kind of agreement that if something is going to be displayed, like a monument, a statue, that there's legal processes where it can't be taken down because there might be some kind of lawsuit. Does the same notion also exist in Brazil and Sao Paulo, where if the school was to alter the exhibit, would they be also open to legal action? And if so, like how is the workaround? Which you've also mentioned, but.
Okay, so thank you for your question. Let me just make a brief comment about that. The case of the São Paulo State Museum is very particular because the building itself is a monument. The building was built specifically to be a monument to the Brazilian independence. So it has a kind of a different status compared to other museums because the building has a historical significance. It is located inside a park that is a public park to commemorate the independence. It has other monuments commemorating the independence of Brazil. So it has a very special status. And the fact that the exhibition itself is protected by law and it's a landmark, it really was it really it's really a very particular case of this São Paulo State Museum. It does not happen in it not does not happen so frequently in other museums in Brazil and even in historical museums. In the case of São Paulo State Museum, in the last renovation of the exhibition, the curators made some consultations with lawyers and regarding what they could and what they could not do by law with this exhibition, and they found out they could not even change the plates depicting or with the glorious names of the figures. So there was not much that could be done aside from making those counterpoints. But I think it was actually a very interesting solution for the problem because, in my opinion, it is a museum where, as a visitor, you are prompted to learn how to critically read a museum. You are requested to do that. You cannot go into the museum without developing some sort of capability of making criticisms to the exhibition. So it has also a didactic purpose that I think it's interesting. It's an interesting way of doing this kind of reinterpretation of the monuments.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that you have that there is the importance of having these counterpoints, having a conversation to also provide insight, to have a bigger to have a bigger conversation, to understand the legacies and to understand the legacies of these types of monuments, and also exhibits, to have that conversation. One of the when you mentioned presenting the example, what also came to mind was the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, with the President Theodore Roosevelt statue, because there was a mythology around him, with like him being a part of the westward, um, working with the Western United States, and being also kind of like an explorer as well. And how his statue that was in front of the museum, where he was on horseback and next to a Native American and someone who was African American, and how they were depicted, because it was like in a subjugated position. And so that was like the question was like, how about their agency, and that, and how the statue was depicting them. So that statue has been removed, but as a part of that process, there was also that didactic dialogue to highlight like why the statue would be controversial, and also to give greater history for understanding.
Yeah, I think this is very similar to the discussion that was made around the monuments, the flag bearer expeditions, because this kind of equestrian representation of white colonizers also happens here. And as we know, it is also common in many other colonial monuments around the world, in the United States, but also in Africa and in many regions that were colonized by Europeans. We have this equestrian tradition of European colonizers or European conquerors riding on horseback and asserting their domination over native populations. And in the case of Victor Brecheret's monuments, the monument to the flag-bearing expeditions, Monumentos Bandeiras, it is interesting because we also see this kind of glorious equestrian representation of the Portuguese colonizers, and they are depicted as Portuguese whites without any kind of mixed ancestry, which was not the case actually of those expeditioners. They were mainly of mixed ancestry, but they are depicted in official discourse as being solely or purely white. And so this was the case of that monument. It brought this kind of equestrian glorious representation, but at the same time, so it was possible to read the monument as putting Native Americans and African Americans in a subordinate position, because they were not on horseback and they were the lower part of the monument, and they were carrying the boat and etc. But at the same time, it is possible to read this monument particularly as some sort of critical look to the fact that those Portuguese leaders were not doing any hard work at all. The expedition was actually being carried, and the hard work of pulling the boat and carrying the goods and etc. was done by the popular workers. So this was also, it is possible also to read this kind of representation in modernist representation of social inequality in Brazilian history. So what's interesting, in my opinion, about this monument is how it can be approached with different views, and how it can give rise to different narratives on the history of Brazilian society. I think this is one of the main reasons why this monument keeps attracting public visibility and keeps attracting so many comments and interventions by demonstrators. I think it has this kind of multiple meanings that are attached to it, and that are very interesting. It is interesting to think about it, as Levi-Strauss used to say about the food restrictions for
Mhm.
Native American populations. He used to say that some animals are good to eat and some animals are good to think about. I think this monument is a kind of monument that is interesting to think about. It brings forth lots of different aspects and interpretations and narratives of Brazilian history.
Yeah, and I think it's so fascinating because with the different types of criticisms about the monuments throughout the years, that was the questions that I had was, when we think about the discourse around the monuments, we think, especially the lens of the United States, we think that it definitely came to a head in 2020, even like a few years leading up to that. But throughout history, there was always there's always these contentions with the monuments. One of the examples that I think about is also the John C. Calhoun statue that is in Charleston, South Carolina, that was ultimately taken down. But throughout the years, the plinth or the statue was elevated because there was acts of vandalism against the statue, which I find very interesting. And this even dates back to the early, believe even like the early 1900s, in around that time period. But then also with the Columbus statues in the United States, there's another like statue that was established by the most part by the Italian American community as an assertion to being as being American before the being assimilated into whiteness in the United States. But it also represents the profound changes, and also the beginning of um, of of displacement and genocide in the Native American communities. So the But one thing that I found but you do have but there was protests as well, like looking at the different papers and whatnot. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting is this, like the banderas and chase were construed as was a multiracial um a it was made of different actors who were from a multiracial background, including Native Americans and also people who are African Americans, African descent. And how is that even how is that it seems like it's like at odds because of what they were doing. They were actually going there and like taking over native lands and also enslaving people. And so there's this disconnect. And I just really think that I wrote in my notes that it's very complicated. And especially when we look at it critically now, as we always have been, but we have these communities who are also directly affected, but then also having that depicted in those monuments as well.
And I think that just adds to the complexity and to the polysemics of the monument, because it can be read to suggest violences against racialized communities, especially Native Americans, but also African Americans, as the flag bearers were also responsible for repressing maroon communities of African descent in Brazil. So it can be read as a sign of violence against those populations, but again, it can be read as a celebration of the mixed racial identity of Brazilian society in the sense of this kind of racial democracy ideology that is so prevalent in Brazilian
Mhm.
society even today. Even
Yeah.
today, the idea of racial democracy is still very popular in Brazil and is still very frequently mobilized to oppose affirmative actions in Brazil. So uh, contesters, right-wing, especially contesters, usually say that affirmative actions in Brazil are not necessary as they are in the United States because Brazil is a racial democracy. Which is supposedly different from what happens in the United States. So this kind of discourse is still today mobilized very frequently. And I think the complexity of this monument is the fact that it is putting together all those discourses. And of course, again, it also makes us reflect upon the complexities of Brazilian colonial history, because in fact, those expeditions uh, 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 were mixed race in their composition, and the wars and the attacks, the slave raiding attacks that were made against Native American communities in the 16th, 17th century in Brazil were frequently made with the help of different Native American communities. So the fact that there were rivalries between different communities was instrumentalized by colonial power to organize attacks from one community to another, and they were frequently involved in the enslavement of other Native Americans. So, of course, this is a very complicated part of Brazilian history and a complicated part about the way that Brazilian colonization actually took place.
Yeah, and I think that it's very that there's always going to be conversations, these but the way that we approach it is always going to evolve. This we have like new insights and whatnot, and how we even again the importance is to tell the history, tell the story, tell the complete history and the stories. And with that note, I know that we are coming to time. for the end of our presentation and for the webinar, and I wanted to invite the audience again, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter it in the chat, and we will make sure that your question or your comment is read and answered. But I think as we're coming, I don't see any questions so far, but definitely we want to keep this conversation going. And I really wanted to thank Dr. Mukuzi for joining us today and sharing a perspective of monuments and contentious monuments in Brazil. And as our conversation was going, there are so many things that, so many nuances and themes that resonate throughout our countries, and this even goes beyond just Brazil and the United States, but then also goes worldwide, and that's why we're here today. So I do encourage you to, again, keep the conversation going, and to also keep in touch with World Heritage USA. Please visit our website, www.worldheritageusa.org, to be in the loop for future events and for future webinars and podcasts. Thank you again, and we definitely look forward to seeing you again in future events. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the day and a great weekend.
Thank you very much, Sakina. I would like to say again that I am very grateful for this invitation and the opportunity to be here talking on ICOMOS webinars, and I am grateful to the Monuments Toolkit project and to Dr. Moore, particularly because of this invitation. And I hope this is just the beginning of conversations about social history, reparation, and the memory of monuments, contested monuments, as you said. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right. Until next time, we'll see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.